he organized a private meeting of top scientists in the area of mind effects in 2007. Begich has authored 5 books in 7 languages on technology and the impacts of change, heard on thousands of radio and television talk shows and documentaries. He is a frequent commentator on new technologies, energy, politics, education, and the environment, and he is our guest tonight here on Late Night in the Midlands. So please welcome Dr. Nick Begich. Welcome to Late Night in the Midlands, Doctor.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us. Very important topic. It's been coming up on a daily basis, with all the earthquakes and stuff that's going on. But before we get into that, I guess, you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself and the work that you do and give out your website as well.
Sure. The website is earthpulse.com, EARTHPULSE, earthpulse.com. Mm-hmm. In the last 16 years, I've been involved primarily in research and reporting on technology areas, although I've done quite a bit of work here in Alaska with indigenous organizations as well during that time. I've published 5 books that are now in 9 languages, all of them dealing with technologies, and then my company recently has started producing dietary supplements and some electronic circuits that we're just getting in the middle of currently, but a lot of exciting things going on in the next few years. And this area, of course, the HAARP issue always comes up, every time there is a natural disaster, it comes up.
Absolutely, it does. Now, I guess my question is, and along with a lot of others, is HAARP to blame for some of this stuff? Can it be linked to it at all?
Well, that is the problem, because I've seen, some of the sites that actually try and make those linkages, and I've just not seen the clear and compelling evidence to say yes it is or no it isn't. And here's the problem: the science itself, you would have to have an absolute understanding of it in terms of what are the triggering frequencies in which a broadcast could create specific events, and what specific type of energy shaping would be involved, what kind of interaction would be involved. To do that would require some pretty sophisticated equipment. Those governments that are involved in this research could easily do that, and I'm sure they are. And that's why you're starting to see now rumblings when there's certain events happen. Some governments are now blaming the U.S. For creating, artificial weather or earthquakes and this kind of thing. And really, when you think about it, most people don't, and when they do, it's like the stuff of science fiction. But there's a really important quote, and I used it in the book Earth Rising the Revolution, which dealt with sort of mixed technology. There's a quote by Secretary of Defense William Cohen, and he made this quote when he was talking about international terrorism and weapons of mass destruction back in 1997, like 4 years before 4 or 5 years before 9/11. Now, here's what he said, and I quote, "Others are engaging even in an eco-type of terrorism, whereby they can alter climate, set off earthquakes, and volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves," unquote. Now, if you think about it, the Secretary of Defense at the time making the statement that terrorists could do this sort of begs the question, how do you know, and how simple is it?
Exactly, because if terrorists can do it, then I'd probably bet my life on it that a government like the United States or China or Russia would be able to do it as well.
Well, and actually they have for quite a while. In fact, you can go back to the 1970s, and the Soviets at the time initiated a environmental treaty where we agreed to not use environmental manipulation, earthquakes, tidal waves, weather modification, as a weapon of war. And the U.S. actually signed on to that before the chemical treaties that we all hear about and some of the biological treaties that we've heard about in recent years. 1977, we agreed to not use geophysical warfare as a weapon.
See, now, why would they agree on something like that if it wasn't a possibility that they could do it?
Well, it was. It was at the time, and that was the point, is everyone was convinced and everyone was worried, because when you start tampering, you can create unintended consequences. Now, since that time, under the last presidential administration, Rumsfeld wanted to abandon that treaty. And he stated the reason he wanted to abandon that treaty was the technology had evolved to a point where we could literally control the battlefield environment. Now, when you think of it, now imagine, for instance, denying somebody rain for a decade until their people starve. Maybe they invite you in. Maybe they have a revolution. And what comes to mind is North Korea.
Yeah.
And but here's what Rumsfeld said. He said it would be the best technology because you have absolute plausible deniability. I mean, who would blame you for the weather, of all things, or an earthquake or a tidal wave? And then the other part of it is, which really kind of gets interesting, is say you have somebody that's not really an adversary, but they're not your friend either, and they're in a strategic location in the world. And what if you hit them with an earthquake, and then all of a sudden, now they need everybody to be their friend, and you're the big friend on the block, so you not only get invited in to clean it up, you establish all those relationships to co-opt a government under the guise of humanitarian aid for maybe an event, I want to say that loudly, that you created yourself. Would our government do it? If Rumsfeld was around, they would. A lot of our administrations would. A lot of them have done worse.
Absolutely. Listen, we have to take a short break here. I had a hard time believing that, but I have since seen some stuff that's kind of made me think, okay, they could probably do this.
Well, and I think that's really it. I mean, the fact of the matter is, what has happened over the years is you can go back even starting with, say, something simple, relatively simple. The weather modification ideas back in the 50s and 60s dealt primarily with cloud seeding and this kind of thing. And more recently, electrostatics and other ideas have been put out there. In fact, if you remember back, maybe it was a decade ago, the Indonesian fires were creating a lot of problems.
Oh, yes, sir.
And it was a group in Russia actually offered to create an artificial cyclone and blow the smoke out of that Malaysia and out of the Indonesian area.
Yes, I was going to bring that up to you.
Well, they took it very seriously. In fact, I think it was, I forget whether it was the Wall Street Journal that reported that. I believe it was. But the thing is, it's not alone. The last congressional session, there was an attempt actually to legislate some of this in a way that would create government as well as private parties, from just engaging in random weather modification. And the bills never went anywhere. But here's the situation: is weather modification has been around a while, and the technologies have improved. And at this point, those technologies allow for exactly what I was saying in the last segment, what Rumsfeld was looking for. The other area, right now in today's news, tornadoes, more people killed and more tornadoes than any day in history.
Oh, God, yeah.
And there was work that Dr. Ben Eastland, who invented the HAARP system, was doing to mitigate tornadoes. And he did work for the European Space Agency on using HAARP for exactly that use. And then he actually took it a step further, and he was invited by NASA and FEMA to look at the same technology but using space-based laser systems. And the way he envisioned both of these, whether it be HAARP or whether it be space-based lasers, was that they would, where these fronts come together, and you have a cold front coming up against a warm front, and then you get that shearing action that causes the tornado formation. And Eastland's idea was if we could radiate with lasers or electromagnetic radiation, heat up this area, then when they came together, there would not be that differential in energy, and the tornadoes wouldn't form. Going a little bit further, he then did work for the University of Pennsylvania. Utilizing the HAARP system, he found that you could actually manipulate weather with 1,600 times less energy than he originally thought. And this is really important because HAARP is big enough to do this now. It doesn't need to get any bigger.
And they have substations around too, don't they?
They have facilities. 5 of the older transmitters, which were pre-HAARP, are in Russia. And Ukraine, and then Europe has the EasyCat system. China has a facility. We have another facility in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, and there's facilities across northern Canada. These facilities vary in what they can be done, what you can do with them, but they've been, as I say, they've been around for a long time.
Sure. Okay, so now you mentioned seeding of the clouds. Now, would the chemtrails have anything to do with what they're doing with HAARP? I mean, would that I hear that they're putting aluminum particles and stuff in the air, and I gotta wonder if that is and somehow connected to HAARP, if they are using HAARP for the things that it said that they're being used for. And I gotta tell you, that's awful lot of power they got over there for nothing. And
Yeah.
they claim that people can go in and take tours, but I know if Jesse Ventura, for one, wasn't allowed to go in there, and
Right,
so,
right. The thing about it, again, when you look at HAARP and you think about the official line, and the official line is what we publish.
Right.
It's their material, and so all of these things come out of the original patents and then the government specifications to build the facility. In fact, it's what we've become known for over the years, is the citations and the detail work that we do to actually document sort of where these technologies are and what exactly is happening. And so when you look at all this and you look at the current state of affairs, yeah, they used to have a very open system. Jesse, when he came up to do the interviews here in Alaska, and I was interviewed for that segment as well, that was the #1 segment in his premiere series that year, and really he was surprised that he didn't get the kind of access that he was expecting. They used to have a completely open access until DARPA took it from the Air Force and Navy, and DARPA does primarily advanced research projects for the various branches of the military and the security agencies.
Right, weapons.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the reality, is the government doesn't do research just for research sake. They do it for weapons applications, communications applications, these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, a weapon it just might be. I was kind of on the fence with this for a long time, but as time goes on here, I'm starting to believe that even if they're testing it out and trying things, and they make mistakes, maybe like a New Orleans or a Japan, they're not going to come out and say, "Oops, we goofed," we were trying it out. So
Right.
I don't know how. Someone's going to have to come out, I guess, and spill the beans on it one of these days.
Well, maybe someone from the inside will. You'd asked me also about the contrails issue, and firstly, I don't generally follow that issue, and I'll tell you a couple reasons why.
Okay.
Firstly, the sampling that's being done to assert that there's aluminum in those contrails and so on, none of that sampling is taking place at the point of discharge. And that's a problem, because aluminum is dispersed in our environment widely, particularly in the Midwest, where in the southern parts of Canada, and in the industrial areas before the Clean Air Act, all of this kind of particulate metals went up the smokestack, scattered around the countryside, and every time the wind blows, it's back in the air. Now, in aluminum as a natural constituent, in all of the southeastern United States, aluminum content in the soils are extremely high. On one of the islands out in the Caribbean, which is built out of coral, on top of it is a bauxite deposit. Now, bauxite is an aluminum ore. Mm-hmm. And there was a dissertation done by Hannah Holmes, became a book called The Secret Lives of Dust, which accounts for the aluminum and many heavy metals by two dust streams, one coming in the west side of the United States and one coming in the east. And that has been proven to be the source of a lot of the heavy metal particulates out of the natural environment. And then you add into that now what's happening in Asia coming into the western states and Canada is pretty extreme. But the sampling on the contrails and chemtrails issues, in my view, are flawed. Secondly, one of the guys who started this thing on contrails called me and wanted to hook it into the HAARP story because he thought it would give it traction. Not that he had any evidence, of course, but he felt that would give it traction. That was Will Thomas. And I'll tell you what, that is not the kind of research I'm interested in. I used to publish Will's work, and I quit publishing his work because it's sloppy and poor journalism. And the reality is there is something going on. But when you confuse it by making up the story, it doesn't help sort out the facts, and it doesn't do much for people's credibility. So what I can say is, yes, there's something going on. No, HAARP doesn't need anything else to have its effect. Although you could use those things, it's not necessary. And thirdly, it's not my issue, and I'm not going to spend the time to research it because it's polluted by too much misinformation now. It's impossible to sort out without huge resources being committed, and quite frankly, it's not high enough on my list of priorities to commit those resources.
Okay, well, that's fair enough, and you're right. You know, there is so much misinformation out there on so many of the important topics, no doubt about it.
Well, and this is important because what we've done in our work, and I think if anyone has looked at any of our books, they are all footnoted, and not with clandestine phone booth conversations. They're footnoted with hard documents you can go touch. And the reason we do that is to avoid these kinds of problems, and the reason we get invited to make testimony in front of political bodies and other bodies that actually act on our information is they know it's reliable. Because if we don't have the evidence, we don't say it. If it's our opinion, we make it really clear. It's our opinion based on the evidence we have, but the facts have to carry the issue, and we've always believed that, and it's got to be with hard evidence. And short of that, it just gets into too much speculation, and then it does not solve the problem.
Very well said. I guess you leave the speculation up to shows like mine, and
it's okay.
and leave the research, the real hard research, to the guys like you.
Well, and it's all right, you know, and I think it is all right, because people need to realize that these things can really happen. And the fact is that the technology exists, and for me, this is always the issue. You know, you get into these issues, and if you're talking about weather modification, then everyone who has a storm wants to talk to you about it. If you're talking about mind control, everybody that has a mental disorder or has a serious problem with government wants to talk to you about it. And here's the problem with all of that is that doesn't solve the problem. What solves the problem is gathering the evidence, proving the technology exists, and then getting that proof in front of political bodies that can look at that evidence and say, well, is this the world we want? And here's what happens often is you put the cart before the horse. People start saying, oh, the U.S. created an earthquake, you know. Mm-hmm. Well, it'd be like 70 years ago, somebody coming into the room with a hole right through the middle of their chest, and they said, a beam of light hit me. It was a laser, and everybody would look at them like they were out of their mind. Today, everybody would accept that. That's common knowledge. Of course, that's a laser. That's what did that.
Absolutely.
But that's the same place we are. We're 70 years ago talking about weather modification and human manipulation, and we just got a lot more education to do. That's why I've been doing this for 16 years. I think it's important enough on the issues I care about. Not that I don't care about all the issues. It's just only one man can do one thing.
Yeah, I hear you on that one.
And you know, and it's important. I get calls all the time with new ideas that people want to put on my plate, and I have to say to them, you know, there's only so much one person can carry, but if you really believe in this issue, you're in the same place I was 16 years ago. I decided it was important enough to act on, and I spent the last 16 years doing it. I didn't ask anybody else to do it for me. And that's how we need to look at these issues. It's great to get the information, but if there's something important to you and you can do something about it, I say do it. Don't do it out of fear, and don't do it out of some sense of irrational obligation. Do it because you believe you can actually accomplish something, and do that part that you believe you can actually accomplish. And issues do tend to take form, and you get the opportunity to do some pretty interesting things. I know I have. Mm-hmm. But it's acting on what we know to be right and true on the issues we care about, and that's what's critical. In fact, that's the underlying message, even in all of the work I've done, is that's what gives us back our power. That's what allows us to move forward in this world today. That's what allows us to look beyond the worries and fears and gain some sense of control over who we are and what we're capable of directing within the world we live in.
I agree with you, and there's some who would say it's a false sense of control. And, you know, me, I like to see the evidence, too. I'll bring up topics. I'll talk about them. But when it comes right down to it, and we're going to point the finger at somebody or something, I'd like to have some kind of evidence that there was some foul play of some sort.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part is hey, if you're going to change your life on something, you better know it's right.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's, again, the obligation of the reporter, I think, is to make sure they get it right. And, you know, yeah, everyone makes mistakes over the course of a long period of time, but how do you deal with those mistakes? Do you clean them up, or do you just let them hang? You know, making it right and doing it carefully, because freedom of the press is more than just saying whatever you want. That's where it's gotten misplaced, is when it was originally put in the Constitution, freedom of the press was about informing the public so that all of us could make good decisions. based on the facts. And today we have the neutered news, which doesn't give us the facts. Talk radio gives us an opportunity to get to them, but the regular news doesn't. It gives you a 30-second soundbite that tells you whatever the spinsters want to spin your way.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, the mainstream media is just, it's all showboating now. It's all about ratings, and it's not about getting the truth out to the people. And I think that's where talk radio and internet radio shows are coming in handy because, you know, especially on the internet, people don't have nothing to lose. They don't have somebody saying, hey, you can't talk about that. And thankfully here on this show, I've got the same thing here on WIC. I don't get told, hey, calm down on this or calm down on that, because I wouldn't. You know, it's important. Whether some of this stuff is true or not, I don't know, so I want to get to the bottom of it. So that's what it's all about.
Yeah, it is, and it is. And I think that's always what it's about. And there's opportunities, you know, in all of this to really have an impact on change. I know on the technology issues, you know, you talk about HAARP, and for some people it scares the hell out of people.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and for good reason. It's a very intense issue, like a lot of issues. You know, we haven't even touched on what I consider to be the most controversial, which is the idea of mind effects. And we got some time tonight, so I'm sure we'll be able to get into that.
I definitely want to as we go down the road. And I just want to say on HAARP, the issue of HAARP, I guess what I would be most concerned about them having that technology is not telling us, because when they don't tell us about it, then it's usually in case they got to use it for, you know, the wrong reasons. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you know, when you know, a lot of people have looked at this issue and spent time with this issue, and that's important. The thing I can say is that there's a lot of good material out there that can help develop people's knowledge of it. You know, just on our website, we've got dozens of pages that are free. They don't cost you anything. Go there, check it out, and then take a look at what's there. If you see something useful, you know somebody in a position of power that actually has some influence, send it to them. You know, it doesn't hurt. Become a committee of one. So much of the success of what we've done has been because of those kinds of individual unselfish acts. And it's amazing.
And we've got even more abilities now with the internet to really reach out to everybody. And with that, I think comes some responsibility too. Is to, like you said, not, you know, don't say, hey, the aliens are coming if you don't know for sure they're coming.
Well, you know, it's funny because you know, it is our tendency as people. I mean, all of us have that tendency to say, you know, do we need to jump on this? Do we need to, you know?
Sure.
You know, and so that always happens. I mean, it's not a bad thing. It's human nature. But at the same time, after that initial sort of rush through all of that, then it's time to sit down and say, all right, you know, what's real? What should we really say? You know, what should we say about this? And what do we really know about this? And that takes a little bit of time. You know, I think about 9/11. You know, and after 9/11, the Congress just railroad us into the terrorism acts that passed, so-called Patriot Act. And then afterwards, hundreds of legislators and local politicians from all over the country just totally flipped out after we all came back down to the calmness of the day. And I'll tell you why that happens. Is if you look at a brain, when it's affected by fear and worry, you get what are called incoherent brain patterns all over the map, no rhythmic patterns. Those brain activities that are associated with rhythmic patterns include the higher emotions of love, empathy, compassion, that focused zone if you're an athlete or a writer or some creative person. And all of us experience that place where everything kind of comes in to focus. And that's when the mind and the brain actually has these rhythmic patterns. Fear and worry don't allow for that. In fact, it's the most simple way to manipulate populations. Just keep them in a constant state fear and anxiety, and you will have served the purpose.
Very well said, and I think that there's a lot of that going on right now. There really is, and in my opinion, I think that 9/11, there was a lot of that involved there as well. I don't think we got the full story on that. As a matter of fact, I know we didn't.
Yep.
But I think it's something that a road they need to go back down before it becomes like Kennedy, where they say, "Oh, it was so long ago, just leave it alone." Well, I don't think things like that should be left alone. I think if there's something that don't add up, then it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, so yeah, now we've got a few minutes before our break here, and then we've got another hour after that. So we might as well start it now. I mean, is it possible? Is there technologies out there that can control the mind?
Well, there are, and there's several things that that get into that issue. Where it came up with HAARP was in a couple of different applications. Firstly, HAARP creates a signal that can then couple with certain components of our natural environment. In particular, the ionosphere, a layer that begins about 30 miles above the Earth's surface, continues for several kilometers, 100 kilometers out from there. And one of the ideas in terms of manipulation was the idea that if we could send a signal up and pulse that signal, send that high-frequency signal up and pulse it, so it's like a hammer hitting a nail, only it's hitting the ionosphere.
Right. And
each time it hits, the ionosphere rings and sets out a vibration that correlates to that pulse rate. And as that vibration swings, the ionosphere is highly energized, so what happens is an energy wave leaves the ionosphere coming down to the Earth as a long wavelength, an ELF, extremely low-frequency signal, penetrates the earth and sea for communication with submarines and for underground imaging for looking for mineral deposits and underground shelters and so forth. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that ELF signal happens to be biologically active, happens to correlate with predominant activities within the brain, and has either a deliberate effect or side effect can cause what's called an FFR, or a frequency-following response, where the brain then locks onto that external signal and begins to mirror it and follow it. And as a consequence, there's a cascade of changes chemically within the brain that then alter a person's emotional state. And that can be done relatively easily with HAARP, and it goes back to some ideas that were first fielded in the 1960s in a book called Unless Peace Comes, a guy named J.F. Gordon MacDonald, who was a science advisor to Lyndon Johnson. He was a full professor of geophysics at UCLA. And he said if we could ever figure out how to electronically stroke the ionosphere in just the right way, we could return a signal to the Earth that would change the behavior of people within huge geographic areas. The same idea was echoed a few years later in a book by Zbigniew Brzezinski called Between Two Ages. And in that book, and for those who don't remember him, he was National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter and one of the founders of the Trilateral Commission, a very influential policy group of insiders, really running too much of the show, quite frankly. But the point is, these ideas have been around a long time, but there was never a system that could deliver until HAARP. And when we testified on this, I was invited, and the European Parliament brought me over to testify on the issue of HAARP. And in the course of that testimony, we got into this mind control aspect. And, to convince a political body of anything, and my family's been in this business a long time. My dad was in the United States Congress in the 70s. My brother Mark, my younger brother Mark, is a U.S. Senator today. So, I know how government works. I know how the process works. 50 years of family experience. We know how it works on the federal, state, and local levels.
Okay, can we hold it right there, and then we'll pick right back up. We're going to be a few minutes on this one, so just hang in there with me. I'm Michael Vera. This is Late Night in the Midlands, and Dr. Nick Begich is my guest, and we're talking about HAARP. We're talking about the technologies of HAARP, and we're probably going to get off even just a little more than HAARP here tonight, so we'll see. You can call in 803-748-9293 after this break. Book, Angels Don't Play This HAARP. Very good book. You want to get it. And okay, Doctor, we're back, so we could pick right back up.
All right. Well, I got to remember where we were at. We were just getting into this article. I think it was on.
Yes.
It was the U.S. Army War College, and it was the RMA, and it's called A Revolution in Military Affairs. And this was written back in the late 80s, and what it was is a discussion about the fact that technology was changing so dramatically in terms of war that the way we used to wage war is basically obsolete. And what they said was essentially that the new front of warfare would change everything. They equated it to the introduction of atomic weapons in the last century or gunpowder in Europe a few centuries ago. Mm-hmm. But it's a change that uses energy as the base, not bullets and bombs and things that blow up, but energy that affects hardware, software, and humans, the human operator. And this is the biggest initiative that the military has ever taken on. And what it has said in terms of its impact on people is what I'm saying. And what they've said is that it violates the Constitution. These new technologies go right in the face of American values. And the U.S. Army War College, where you would think they would then talk about why they should be prevented, did the opposite. In this article, The Revolution of Military Affairs and Conflicts Short of War, they wrote that what we should do is create an environment of fear based on international drug trafficking and international terrorism. And in that environment of fear, people would lay their civil liberties aside in exchange for the so-called security, which there is no security in that, and the fear has bred nothing but absolute domination by government. The war on terrorism has been a war on the American public by the government because it's allowed them to strip us bare and allow us fully exposed and transparent while our government continues to operate in a dark way that most people would find objectionable. You know, WikiLeaks was low-level intelligence about the kind of scum that we're involved in, blackmailing our allies, blackmailing our friends into submitting to our will based on gathering, information about their personal lives. The way our government operates does not reflect the values most Americans have. But this particular paper said fear would change that. And man, are they right. Because if you look at international terrorism as it affects American lives, over 10,000 people have died if you consider the war, if you consider everything that's affected Americans. 10,000 Americans are dead, and that's a lot of people. But over that same 20 years that we've been fighting this war on terrorism, when you go back to the 90s, over 2 million people have died of medical malpractice in the United States, just to give it some perspective. More people die of medical malpractice than terrorism, but how many column inches in the news media get dedicated to that? Unless it's for tort reform, for excusing people's mistakes. Exactly. The reality is, it is an issue that's important, but it has to be on balance with the rest of the issues, and we certainly don't give up everything the country stands for 200 years for some sense of safety and security, in which we get neither.
No, because if there really were terrorists that we had to worry about, then they would be winning, because that's what they're set out to do, change America, right? So, yep. And Obama said it the best, I guess, change. Well, we're getting change, all right, and it started before him, believe me, I know this. It's just amazing to me how we put so much effort and money and energy into technologies that destroy lives, destroy people, destroy countries, destroy planets even, and we put very little into advancing the human race, because I've said this a million times. If we're ever going to go on forever, this human race, then we need to figure out a way to get off the planet and populate the universe. And, rather than getting technologies to kill each other, look at how much could have been accomplished. It's just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot more. And I think that's, again, where as time goes on, I think as people get more aware of these issues, then the opportunity to make change will be there, and I think that's important. And the important parts of all of this, as you just look forward into what's happening, it's really up to us to decide how much of this, are we going to allow to continue, and that takes a lot of people to step up to the plate and start taking on issues. And I know a lot are. Talk radio listeners happen to be the most activist people in the population as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, you're right. You're right. They really are. Talk radio is where it's at. Since I was a little kid, I listened to talk radio. I really have. Don't get me wrong. I like my music too, but I've always been a talk radio listener. I love it. It's where you're going to get the most truth, rather than these news shows. I mean, I seen Fox the other, I don't know, a couple weeks back, and this one anchor's on there saying that amount of radiation is good for us, that we shouldn't worry about it.
Well, if you're talking about the sun, maybe so. You know, a little vitamin D never hurt anybody, you know, in terms of activating our bodies. But, you know, again, it's downplaying the obvious and responding to press releases instead of real information. And that is part of the problem and the dilemma that we face today. You know, very few news outlets spend the time that's required to really do the kind of in-depth reporting that is required today. And that's where, you know, we've tried to fill a little bit of that in terms of what we do, and taking complicated technical projects and then breaking them down into plain language so that we can actually have a conversation and actually maybe make a difference. And we're making progress. It's slow and steady, but it is progress.
Right, and what's funny is I watch some of these mainstream media outlets sometimes just for kicks and giggles, and I'll watch, and a guy like, say, Stanton Freeman will get on there. I mean, here's a guy with tons of degrees, and you'll have a guy who teaches science class, you know, telling him that he's crazy. And it's just amazing to me. I mean, you know, you guys, all you researchers, you've got degrees. I mean, you're very smart individuals who are bringing this information to us, and yet there's still the fools out there who, they're crazy. I mean, that's the world we live in.
Well, it's always attack the messenger, and really it's about the message. And if people want to dispute the facts, look up the footnotes, look up the data yourself, which is why we provide it. It's
right.
Because we want people to have that, because people who are skeptical should be skeptical. We should all be skeptical until the evidence is presented, and that's what makes good policy. There's way too much running out in left field when you don't have all the facts, and it's what we've been very careful about. And quite frankly, why we've stayed in this work for 16 years is because over time, what we've written and what we've suggested is going to happen did happen. Not some of the time, every time. We haven't retracted one single published word since we first published in terms of our conclusions about this technology of HAARP, you know, and that's it. And all I can say is, as time goes on, the rest of the story will be proven out, and the rest of the material that we've laid out for the public, which is, I think, important all the way around. But it's, you know, it's my issue. So, you know, we all have our own issues, and I appreciate it. And the fact is, there are a lot of things that we can be doing now that are different before. The Internet, as you said, is a double-edged sword. It offers us incredible opportunities to really get some neat things done, but at the same time offers the challenges of a more transparent society.
That's right. I mean, it could be a home wrecker or it could be a home builder. So,
well, it's like the mail can either deliver the bomb or deliver the credit card bill, I guess, which may be a little minor bomb.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if they have this technology to control weather, I guess another thing they could be sinful for is not sending a blazing snowstorm over to Japan right now to freeze those reactors.
Well, I don't think that's going to solve that problem either. And
no.
You know, unfortunately, we are stuck with some really horrible situations coming from that event. And I know there's been a lot of speculation about the cause. Some have attributed it to HAARP. And you know, this is what's important: is the fact that people are talking about this, making those assertions. Perhaps, just perhaps, it will get the attention of governments that will begin to look at this issue in a much more serious way moving forward, without having to draw conclusions about what was and what wasn't going on with this event. I think we're going to see a lot more interest in these issues in the coming years.
I agree with you. Now, we've got a few minutes left, so if there's anything else you want to get out there, maybe tell us what's coming up in your near future or what have you, websites, books, by all means, please go right ahead.
Well, I'm starting to consider doing a little more lecturing, mostly in the winter and fall, and I've kind of had a couple years where I haven't done virtually any. I think I gave one lecture in Germany in the last 2 years. I used to give a couple a month around the country, so we're going to start doing a little more of that as we find sponsors for that kind of activity to get these issues out. We are just finishing bringing in the device we demonstrated in the European Parliament for sound transfer. Has a number of unique possibilities. We're going to be bringing that device back into the marketplace here at the latter part of the summer. And so we're pretty excited about that, because that's really a direction we've wanted to go for some time. The idea of enhancing human performance is a big issue for us, and there's 3 or 4 electronic circuits that we have in design that we're going to try and bring into production over the next 18 months. And so pretty exciting time for us, and sort of taking the other side of, all this stuff about what we can do to improve the physical body. The things I'm interested in are what can we do to improve the mind, and more importantly, what can we do that might even break loose some of those anomalous capabilities that human beings have, which is a whole nother area for perhaps another evening. But the idea that human beings have unique qualities and characteristics that aren't generally recognized, and those unique characteristics we used to call extrasensory perceptions or gifts of the spirit. In fact, the biggest thing that came out of our Mind Effects conference, and we had the best in the world sitting around the table, the most surprising thing to me that came out of it, and it came out of the mouth of a nun who is also a physicist and was a full professor of mathematics at Berkeley, and she's very elderly now, and she said hers was the next evolution of mankind, was awakening to these capabilities, these hidden abilities within us, where we can actually manifest those as a birthright, as our natural state of being. And if you think about it, when I looked at all the Mind Effects research, and again, Controlling the Human Mind is the most condensed book I've ever written on the subject, when we researched all that, everyone gets to this idea of the Manchurian kind of candidate mind control stuff, which is absolutely possible and has been since the 1930s. But the fact is, that isn't what they discovered. That was so profound. What they discovered were these latent capabilities that all of us have. And it scared the hell out of them. Because if only a handful of human beings on the planet were fully actualized with that potential, the show would be over. It takes one to lead the next revolution of human consciousness, and I think that revolution has already started. And I think that's where the solutions lie. And you talk about solutions, we talk about political solutions, talk about technology countermeasures and all of that stuff, and it still drives back to fear. The real answer is evolving beyond fear. Nothing can happen if we are afraid and if we are worried. It is the easiest way to keep people enslaved to the trap that we're in, to the hamster wheel that we're on. To break free of it, we have to break free of fear and worry, and that is the challenge for all of us.
And a very, very big challenge at that, believe me. And some of the things we talk about here on this show every night would keep a normal person up. But somehow I managed to get to sleep at night, even though I know, and it's just, the problem is weeding through what is real and what is just a story. And, we get into some scary stuff here. Planet X is one of those things that I believe exists, but we talk about that, and some say that's what's causing the earthquakes. Others say it's HAARP. I'm hoping that it's HAARP.
Hey, if there is a Planet X, those guys are all on a timeline now. It's like predicting the end of the world. You better be right, because the next day you're not in a job.
That's right.
But regardless, I don't mean to poke fun at that. I'm just saying that each thing will see its day in the sun. And as we move forward on any of these issues, and I am in touch with so many alternative thinkers. I hear everything under the sun, in terms of ideas and what's happening, and a lot of it is extremely interesting to me. But at the same time, there's only so many things a guy can do, and the HAARP issue keeps coming back. I keep trying to move on, but it's impossible. So now I'm stuck with it. Right? And I don't mind, because it is important. But the next leap for me is really about finding those answers that help us become more capable, more able to do the things that I think as humans we're called to do, and that we're capable of doing. And to me, that's an exciting time. That is something that lifts me up in the middle of looking at all of this sort of bad news.
And there's plenty of it.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of it.
Well, I thank you so much for not only being a guest on Late Night in the Midlands, but for the great work that you do, and looking forward to having you back in the near future to talk about more of your findings and how we can better mankind. That's definitely the big question.
Well,
he organized a private meeting of top scientists in the area of mind effects in 2007. Begich has authored 5 books in 7 languages on technology and the impacts of change, heard on thousands of radio and television talk shows and documentaries. He is a frequent commentator on new technologies, energy, politics, education, and the environment, and he is our guest tonight here on Late Night in the Midlands, so please welcome Dr. Nick Begich. Welcome to Late Night in the Midlands, Doctor.
hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us. Very important topic. It's been coming up on a daily basis, with all the earthquakes and stuff that's going on. But before we get into that, I guess, you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself and the work that you do, and give out your website as well.
Sure. The website is earthpulse.com, EARTHPULSE, earthpulse.com.
Mm-hmm.
In the last 16 years, I've been involved primarily in research and reporting on technology areas, although I've done rumblings when there's certain events happen. Some governments are now blaming the U.S. For creating, artificial weather or earthquakes and this kind of thing. And really, when you think about it, most people don't, and when they do, it's like the stuff of science fiction. But there's a really important quote, and I used it in the book Earth Rising the Revolution, which dealt with sort of mixed technology. There's a quote by Secretary of Defense William Cohen, and he made this quote when he was talking about international terrorism and weapons of mass destruction back in 1997, like 4 years before 4 or 5 years before 9/11. Now, here's what he said, and I quote, "Others are engaging even in an eco-type of terrorism, whereby they can alter climate, set off earthquakes, and volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves," unquote. Now, if you think about it, the Secretary of Defense at the time making the statement that terrorists could do this sort of begs the question, how do you know, and how simple is it?
Exactly, because if terrorists can do it, then I'd probably bet my life on it that a government like the United States or China or Russia would be able to do it as well.
Well, and actually, they have for quite a while. In fact, you can go back to the 1970s, and the Soviets at the time initiated a environmental treaty where we're really an adversary, but they're not your friend either, and they're in a strategic location in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what if you hit them with an earthquake, and then all of a sudden, now they need everybody to be their friend, and you're the big friend on the block, so you not only get invited in to clean it up, you establish all those relationships to co-opt a government under the guise of humanitarian aid for maybe an event, I want to say that loudly, that you created yourself. Would our government do it? If Rumsfeld was around, they would.
Absolutely.
A lot of our administrations would.
Oh,
a lot of them have done worse.
Absolutely. Listen, we have to take a short break here. I had a hard time believing that, but I have since seen some stuff that's kind of made me think, okay, they could probably do this.
Well, and I think that's really it. I mean, the fact of the matter is, what has happened over the years is you can go back even starting with, say, something simple, relatively simple. The weather modification ideas back in the 50s and 60s dealt primarily with cloud seeding and this kind of thing. And more recently, electrostatics and other ideas have been put out there. In fact, if you remember back, maybe it was a decade ago, the Indonesian fires were creating a lot of problems.
Oh, yes, sir.
And it was a group in Russia actually offered to create an artificial cyclone and blow the smoke. He agreed to not use environmental manipulation, earthquakes, tidal waves, weather modification, as a weapon of war. And the U.S. actually signed on to that before the chemical treaties that we all hear about and some of the biological treaties that we've heard about in recent years. 1977, we agreed to not use geophysical warfare as a weapon.
See, now, why would they agree on something like that if it wasn't a possibility that they could do it?
Well, it was. It was at the time, and that was the point, is everyone was convinced and everyone was worried, because when you start tampering, you can create unintended consequences. Now, since that time, under the last presidential administration, Rumsfeld wanted to abandon that treaty. And he stated the reason he wanted to abandon that treaty was the technology had evolved to a point where we could literally control the battlefield environment. Now, when you think of it, now imagine, for instance, denying somebody rain for a decade until their people starve. Mm-hmm. Maybe they invite you in, maybe they have a revolution. And what comes to mind is North Korea.
Yeah.
And but here's what Rumsfeld said. He said, it would be the best technology because you'd have absolute plausible deniability. I mean, who would blame you for the weather, of all things, or an earthquake or a tidal wave? And then the other part of it is, which really kind of gets interesting, is say you have somebody that's not done quite a bit of work here in Alaska with indigenous organizations as well during that time. I've published 5 books that are now in 9 languages, all of them dealing with technologies. And then my company recently has started producing dietary supplements and some electronic circuits that we're just getting in the middle of currently. But a lot of exciting things going on in the next few years. And this area, of course, the HAARP issue always comes up. And every time there is a natural disaster, it comes up.
Absolutely, it does. Now, I guess my question is, and along with a lot of others, is HAARP to blame for some of this stuff? Can it be linked to it at all?
Well, that is the problem, because I've seen, some of the sites that actually try and make those linkages, and I've just not seen the clear and compelling evidence to say yes, it is, or no, it isn't. And here's the problem: the science itself. You would have to have an absolute understanding of it in terms of what are the triggering frequencies in which a broadcast could create specific events, and what specific type of energy shaping would be involved, what kind of interaction would be involved. To do that would require some pretty sophisticated equipment. Those governments that are involved in this research could easily do that, and I'm sure they are. And that's why you're starting to see now